Welcome to ULTRA TV, the cinematic Monte to Ultra Magazine's Rosa. We're here today with Jasmin Paris to discuss all things about running through the Swiss Alps and lots more besides. Jasmin, hello.
Hello.
And thank you ever so much for agreeing to speak to us today. Fabulous achievement, UTMR. Tell us all about it. What was the highlights for you? What went well? What didn't go so well?
Thanks very much. It's a fantastic race. It's a really sort of technical course, and the scenery is amazing. So I think those are kind of real highlights. I mean, the views of when we were running towards Zermatt and then beyond the kind of loop around Zermatt, the views of the Matterhorn are fantastic. Some really exciting kind of rocky terrain, fun stuff to run on. So I really enjoyed that. There was some exposure in places as well, which is kind of challenging when you're on tired legs. But yeah, lots of fun. And I think the other thing about the race that's really amazing is it has a kind of really friendly family feel.
Right.
And that's probably partly because it's a much smaller race than, say, the UTMB. The checkpoints are kind of, it feels a bit like coming back to your family at every checkpoint. I said that at the end of the race, and I think Lizzie said, "Oh, you must have a really dysfunctional family." But no, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
At the checkpoints, they couldn't do enough to help. Offered massages and everything,
really?
Everything and beyond.
Nice.
I think, and it's also because it's quite a long race. After 32 hours of running, the sort of people that you'd been around running during the race, it felt like we'd come through something together. So it was. Felt like you'd sort of made friends on the way as well.
What size is the field for UTMR?
I'm sorry you asked that question. I think it was around 200 runners.
Yeah,
but,
it's not big, is it?
Yeah, so it's kind of probably 10 times less than the UTMB.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. So, thinking, I suppose we better explain to people what UTMR is, shouldn't we? Really? So,
yeah.
Do you want to just give them a bit of give people an overview of what the race entails?
So the UTMR is the Ultra Tour of Monte Rosa. So it's a race around Monte Rosa. It starts in Switzerland, and usually it would go through Italy as well, although this year the route was changed because of COVID.
Okay.
So I do really hope to go back and do the Italian part as well, because I think that section, when you go over into Italy, you go over a big glacier quite high up, so I would like to go back and do that part of the race as well. So that's and it's quite so it's this year it was 175 kilometers, so it's actually more than a 100-mile race. It's about, I think my watch had about 108, 109 miles, with 11,000 meters of ascent, so it's longer, more ascent, and also more technical than the UTMB. Great stuff. And much wilder as well. It felt sort of much wilder, both in terms of fewer supporters on the route, and just the kind of terrain that you were going through, and the places. It felt wilder. So did it feel more like a purist race compared to kind of the commercial element of UTMB? It did feel more like that. There was also very little in the way of kind of stalls or advertising or kind of media stuff around it. It was, to be honest, it was I think a kind of a fell runner's 100-mile race. So me it was kind of stripped back, and it was what it all comes down to is wanting to run in the mountains. So yeah, it was. I really enjoyed it. I would really recommend it. Cool.
So it's great to hear that you had so many positive experiences at UTMR. Were there anything on the flip side of that wasn't quite so good?
I guess I think most people in a 100-mile race have a kind of bad patch. I did have that coming out of the valley. So roughly sort of 60k into the race, we had to run down a valley for 20k. Which is, I think, partly because of the route change. It was a nice enough track, but it's kind of hot in the valley, and most ultra runners are not used to running that fast for 60k into the race. And then we had to do a huge climb back out of the valley. And at that point, I started to feel sick, which is kind of standard, isn't it, at some point in a long race? So that was kind of a low point,
right.
But I managed to pull myself out of that, so that was good. And then the other kind of hard aspect of the UTMR for me was that I really struggled with feeling sleepy on the night, the kind of second night, or the first full night, and I was just kind of tripping up, and honestly, I'm not sure if it would have been better to just have a power nap on the path. I did think about just lying down on the path, but the runners were quite spaced out by then, so I thought I might just end up sleeping for quite a while. So I just drank some Coke at the next checkpoint instead. But
Okay,
it made me think that I think you can get these kind of caffeine, like chewing gum things.
Yeah.
And I thought I
you
might
get those
try.
little blocks of kind of caffeine stuff.
Yeah, so I think I might see about something like that in the future.
And you've done quite a lot of racing abroad. You've done some racing abroad. Is there any major differences between racing over there and racing over in the UK?
I guess probably for me the biggest difference would just be that in the UK I tend to run fell races, and whereas when I'm abroad, fell running doesn't really exist in the same way there. I think it's more because of the style of the big mountains like the Alps, you have to be running on a kind of set course, whereas in the UK and fell races often it's unmarked, and also you can kind of choose your route across the fells, whereas I think that's probably harder to do in mountains like the Alps. There's less navigation often, I think, in the races over there, or at least the races that I've run over there. Or there are some that you would navigate as well, but I think the fell running in itself is kind of a unique sport, really,
right.
And that's what I tend to do here in the UK, so that's why there's differences. Also, I guess the climate's different, and I think that makes it can be challenging, I think, as a runner based in Scotland, the heat can be challenging. So I did actually, before the UTMR, I did go to a friend's sauna for some sessions after training, and that was both kind of heat acclimatization, but also supposed to help with altitude acclimatization as well. Yeah,
because you did.
That's another kind of challenge.
You got the Munro's record, didn't you? Now, there wasn't a female record, was there? And you've kind of established one, or was there a new beat? I couldn't work it out.
There wasn't really. I don't think anybody had kind of set out to do that challenge specifically. I guess indirectly I sort of held it because the Ramsey round contains 23 Munros.
Okay.
And I held the record for that, although we were sort of joking about it because when Helen ran her Ramsey round, it was actually 24 before one of them was, dropped down, declassified. Yeah, so you could argue that she held it, but yeah, I think, but that obviously that was quite. I mean, I ran that in 16 hours 13 minutes, so it was, there's quite a lot of extra time there to get more runs, so it wasn't really a 24-hour record.
Yeah.
So this was the first.
But the one you did in July was 29, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In 24 hours, and that looked like it was a baking hot day.
Yeah, it was super hot that day. I had to be honest, I don't really like running in heat that much, so what I find helpful is to kind of, at least what I did that day was I lay down in every water source that we went past, so pretty much just got in every stream and river, and then also I had a hat, so I'd fill that with water and stick it on my head. I think cold water is really helpful to a point, and then I think sort of got to the evening time, and I think by that point I was just kind of pretty exhausted, but before that it was working pretty well to kind of reinvigorate me each time.
Okay, good. So Munro record, you didn't really give yourself a lot of time, did you? Because that was the end of July-ish, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the end of end of July.
And then you had August, and then kind of middle of September, you were off to Switzerland to go and do something epic again. So how do you manage your recovery in a relatively short period of time? It's kind of 6 weeks-ish.
Yeah, no, I kind of take your point. I guess part of the reason it was that way was I did a Rigby round before the Munro round, so that was kind of June time, I think, and also because I do clinical work, I'm quite restricted in terms of the weekends available. I had to choose a weekend actually after a week that I'm not on clinics, because I find it, but otherwise I'm so sleep deprived, there's no way I could run a 24-hour round. So, but anyway, you're right, there wasn't that much time in between. I guess in terms of recovery, I think it helps to kind of be fit when you actually do the challenge in the first place, and then you're kind of you're kind of at a level, so it's easier to, you don't kind of drop that far down from that, even if you're not doing that much. You don't have to be training that hard, you just have to recover between the two events, if you see what I mean. You just kind of have to hold that baseline. I do some kind of cross training in the sense that I do swim here in the reservoir,
beautiful,
which I'm really lucky. I do some cycling to work and so on, and I think just in terms of running, we just kind of, probably for a week really dropped back. I didn't do very much at all for a week, and then just built it up a bit again with some harder stuff sort of that finished 2 weeks out from the UTMR, so the last 2 weeks was sort of tapering down. So
Okay. So kind of two weeks.
It was probably, I'm guessing if there was 6 weeks or so between, it was probably like a week or two when it was pretty easy. Then there was 2 weeks when I did some kind of harder training, and then 2 weeks tapering down.
Right. Okay. And in terms of kind of, seeing as we're on the subject of training, it seems to me that you perform consistently highly on a variety of terrains, right? So, you talk about fell running, which, there's not much you really haven't chalked off, is there, in terms of, I don't know, you're very modest, so I won't embarrass you, but there isn't really much you haven't chalked off in terms of fell races. And then you kind of get on the really steep rocky stuff and you perform consistently highly on that, be that abroad or be that over, the Dragon's Back win, of course, and there's the Spine Race, which is a mixture of kind of rocky stuff and felly, moory, boggy stuff, isn't there? So how do you kind of, how do you adapt? How does your training adapt? Because this is a beautiful vista, by the way. So you can come out your door and run over these beautiful hills that we can see here, but there's not many rocky mountains right here. So how did you adapt your training to make you consistently perform on this different terrain? Yeah,
no, so it's true, we're super lucky with where we live. I think the biggest kind of challenge, to be honest, training wise, is because road, flat, you can get that most places. I get kind of hilly, I get kind of boggy, heathery, tussocky, kind of gentle rolling hills here. The big challenge is kind of for the European races is for the long climbs and the long descents, and kind of more rocky stuff. Since I've had kids, it's harder to go for a weekend up north, because you could get maybe 1,000-meter climb if you go up north. But here in the Pentlands, basically for the UTMR, to kind of get to the point, I did long runs where in the Pentlands I would run along the ridge, but which has multiple, maybe 7 summits along the ridge, but between each summit I would drop right down into the valley and back up again.
Right.
So I managed to I think I managed 3,000 meters in 20 miles or something in the Pentlands, which I think was fairly impressive.
Pretty good going, yeah.
But it just and also just tried to choose the routes that were as wild, as kind of rugged as possible, but it's a limitation. And to be honest, you can tell, because when you get out, I've just spent 2 weeks in Switzerland, and by the end of the 2 weeks I felt I've just found my mountain legs again. You just can't recreate that without going to big mountains. I think to some extent you just can't do it until you get there.
Yeah. So you engineer the elevation kind of.
You do as much as you can, but you can't kind of get that consistent long climb, because it's broken up. What I would recommend is, if you can get to somewhere where you can do those consistently long climbs and long descents, because it's almost the descents that are the big challenge for your quads. Getting used to that.
So that's the kind of physical side of it then. Yeah. So I mean, there's something here about the kind of psychological digging in when you're doing these long climbs and these long descents. So any advice for anybody about how you manage that? Because I mean, that's because you like say you can't recreate that. So how do you kind of just click into that grind, pick your gear? And
I guess that sort of comes back as well to just the psychological aspect of, for example, training through winter. So as the nights draw in and you're getting up at 5 a.m, that's equally a psychological challenge of getting up. So I guess I think because I guess I would come back to the point that I think that a huge part of ultra running is what's in your head. So it is a really important factor. Some of it comes down to kind of believing in yourself. Once you've done multiple long races, you kind of develop some degree of self-belief, and that helps you, and you kind of have these bad patches, or you're doing a long climb or a long descent, as you say. I find things that help is running races that are in places that are beautiful, and basically I run because I love it. So I would only really choose races that go to places that I want to run. So it helps just by being in the mountains or the hills, is because I'm happy to be there. So just look around you.
Okay. It's great advice, actually, because it's very easy just to look at your feet and.
Yeah. I mean, you do have to still look at your feet, especially if you're running something technical. I definitely felt that on the UTMR. I was like, I'm not even looking up. And running with friends helps. And these kind of long things, I find it helpful to just think about the next little bit that you've got to do. Not try and look at the big picture too much, just look at the next little bit, and keep eating.
And are you one of these people that reflects on their achievement and kind of, because I know you're modest, right? So, but do you reflect on your achievement and go, yeah, go me, I did that? Or do you think, right, got to the finish line, first female, go me, what's next?
I mean, I do think about the race afterwards. I mean, and kind of like assess what happened and what I could have done better. I guess I'm just naturally like a perfectionist, so I try to, if there's something that, to be honest, it's more things like, for example, if I'm running a navigation race and I've screwed something up, then that really annoys me. It's not so much about not winning, it's about when I've messed something up that I could have done better.
Yeah.
I'm okay with not placing highly as long as I gave it my best. So, and often I think at the end of races, it's not so much about like finished first or whatever, it's did I like give it everything that I could.
Give an account of yourself.
And yeah. So and that's why and also I'm not always racing so as much for first woman. It's like just as can I do the best I can do in that race? So I'll be thinking about where I'm in the overall race as well. So for the UTMR, I was 9th overall. Yeah. But when I got to the end, I was thinking more, to be honest, about could I have caught those 3 that were in front of me and what did I need to do? Do you know what I mean? So
I do.
It's not just about finishing first lady, because I'll be
racing well,
racing the field. Yeah.
And let's face it, actually, you finished first in your own right. So I mean, that was unfair of me to say that, because obviously you finished. We won't go into the spine because I'm sure you've done that to death. But you were the first person over the line at the spine and broke the course record.
Yeah, that felt good. That felt good to be racing at the front of the field.
That must have been weird, though, right? So you get over the line, you kiss the wall, and everybody's like, "Yay!" And then all of a sudden, you're in this almost kind of Wizard of Oz tornado, and then you're slapped back in the centre of this kind of public media kind of maelstrom. Because I mean, I saw the interview with you on the BBC, and I think it was the day after or something, and you looked, you were tired. No offence, but you looked tired. But it was like, oh my good grief, what's all this all this attention? How did that feel?
Yeah, no, that interview was really crazy, because literally I finished that like the night before, slept for a few hours in my own bed, and went into Edinburgh for like an 8 a.m. interview on the TV. So it was really quite surreal. I guess I mean, I'm not sure there'll ever be anything like the spine in terms of kind of the media attention that I get, because it just sort of, I think it transcended not just kind of fell running into normal running, it went into just kind of general, just general news. Yeah. So it was an incredible experience. It was good to be able to kind of make some maybe positive kind of influences on kind of women in sport and breastfeeding and all that sort of thing. Yeah. I was happy when it kind of finally all sort of died off. The last year it sort of all died off a bit again, and because it took a huge amount of time, and also actually I think that after the spine you'd say I was good at recovery, but I struggled after the spine that summer, and I don't think it was the physical aspect. It was just I didn't really sleep enough, because I was doing interviews and having a small child and trying to train still, and it's just that extra thing in your life, all that kind of media stuff tipped it over the edge, and I struggled to recover with that. Whereas now, after the UTMR, for example, now I already feel a lot better, and it's only been sort of like 2 weeks, and I think it's just because there's not so much kind of stuff
because there's only so many hours in the day, isn't there?
Exactly,
and you are you've got a full-time job, you're a full-time mum as well, and I know you've got comrades, you've got support at home, but it's still a lot. So from a capacity point of view, like you say, there's a very fine kind of margin where you can fit anything else in.
Exactly, yeah.
And so I don't want to kind of get too hung up on this whole recovery stuff, right? But do you kind of plan your race calendar with any kind of strategy in mind? So do you right, okay, so it is New Year's Eve, we've got a year ahead of us, we're going to sketch, do you get a wall planner out and sketch out and say, well, if I do this, then I can't do that? Or is it just, I really fancy UTMR next year, we'll sketch that in?
It's probably a bit more like the second kind of scenario. I think there tends to be like 1 or 2 big things that I want to do in a year. And one of the problems is that a lot of the things all happen around the same time, like that September kind of window when you have the UTMR, like UTMB, Tour de Géant, PTL, Swiss Peaks, all those kind of big races. And I think it's just because the mountains, they're free of snow for that kind of period, and they can guarantee that you're going to be able to run those races, which is probably why they all happen then. So I generally would have like 1 or 2 kind of races that I would think, because I have a list of these races that I want to do. I'm just trying to work out which order I do them in, which years, and then fit in other things around that. So to some extent it's determined by what you get into, like for example, I have applied in the past for hard rock and not got placed. So I will apply for that again and
Yeah.
see, you know, and if I get a place for hard rock, then things will fit in around that.
Cool. Yeah, it'd be good to see you there, actually. That'd be good. So, having said we're not going to get hung up on the spine, I had the pleasure of interviewing Anna Troop and Sabrina Vergi earlier on, about a month ago actually, and obviously Anna's just done the spine south to north and did a really good achievement, but they both think that there's a kind of sub 70 hour in there somewhere. With your kind of history on the Pennine Way, what's your thinking about that, and is that something you may tempted to kind of have a look at?
I mean, it's entirely possible. Yeah, I mean, obviously I followed John Kelly and Damien as they've kind of had their tussle over the Pennine Way record, and it's fun to watch that. In terms of time, yeah, maybe. I think it probably would be possible to do sub 70. Yeah, so I think it's a possibility.
Yeah.
It's just kind of fitting these sorts of things in, because that sort of challenge will take you out for a while.
Yeah.
And you also have to train kind of specifically for that. Spine is not the Pennine Way route is not quite as hilly or as technical as I would usually choose to race or run. In the winter, it was obviously had the added challenge of being in winter, largely in darkness, the whole kind of looking after yourself because it was unsupported. So the spine had these kind of extra challenges. But in terms of running in the summer, I might always be more tempted to do something more hilly and mountainous.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
but it's entirely possible that I'll come back to the Pennine Way at some point.
Never say never.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. One of the things that probably frustrates people who watch our Ultra TV channel is I always talk about nutrition. It's like a pet thing of mine, and I'm really interested in it. So I've read other interviews with you, and you kind of just say, well, you know, you eat healthy anyway, and you kind of cook meals and all the rest of it. But is there a specific do you take a specific approach to your nutrition, to what you eat when you're out on these longer races, and you know, how does that look for you? Is it gels, or is it kind of chocolate brown?
Yeah.
You know, what does your nutrition look like?
I guess I would always try to eat normal food for as long as I can in these kind of ultra races, and I do think that helps. You know, like if you start eating gels early on or consistently eat something like gels, then it just messes with my stomach, and it would end up having real problems. It was interesting on the ETMR actually. I really noticed that when I stopped and had like a proper meal, as in like soup, salty soup with pasta in it, it was really interesting because at 30 minutes later my stomach would start grumbling, like really loudly making noises, and I think it must have just been that it sort of got restarted, you know, like digestion was like, oh, some proper food, and like then just restarted, so it kind of made me hungrier.
But did that improve your performance? Did that correspond with a kind of an extra energy?
Yeah, kind of kick? I think that then the kind of mood lifted as well, obviously. So generally I would eat proper food as long as I could in a race, and I think obviously at the start when you don't really kind of want to be hanging around in checkpoints to eat a meal, but I would still be trying to eat kind of more sort of real food. I'm lucky to get kind of supported by Supernatural Fuel, so they make this kind of and I've been using those kind of
puree pouches
that are also recyclable, which is nice, and it's just like fruit and like oats and stuff mixed together, which is nice to have kind of that on it's like adult baby food on a hill. So I use those, and I'd use things like, I mean, I eat chocolate bars, I eat cereal bars, blackjack, like fruit and nut. Kind of, it's nice to have salty stuff as well. I would use some gels, and I use them on the ETMR as well, but it would be more tempted. I more sort of use them when I was having an energy dip, and I do find that then they help bring you out of it, so you can eat normal stuff again.
Kick up the pants. Sugar kick.
Yeah.
One of the conversations that has been bubbling along on some social media stuff over the last few days is off the back of the Dragon's Back, which finished on Saturday. Simon Roberts kind of won that one. The first 3 days actually, but the first 2 days in particular saw a really high attrition rate due to heat and due to a lot of athletes struggling with hydration. And the debate on social media at the moment is where's the responsibility of race directors to adjust the races or not adjust the races depending on those type of conditions. And I suppose there's a couple of schools of thought, right? So it'd just be interesting to get your, where you kind of, or if there's a different school of thought. But so there's one school of thought that says the race director has a responsibility to adapt the race accordingly. So if it's foul weather where you've got really bad conditions, there's a foul weather course, right? And you kind of drop off the high stuff. Is there a responsibility for race directors to change the course for the weather that's too, if it's too hot, do you need to kind of adapt the course so people can drop off and go in and get water sources that isn't on the existing course? Or is it down to each individual athlete to be able to manage themselves sufficiently enough to cope with the conditions irrespective of how they present themselves? And I didn't know kind of if you've got a view on that, because you've done you do the extreme races, so you do long races in extreme conditions, and you know how that feels. So where do you think this kind of race director's responsibility starts and stops?
I think that kind of decision about where that's actually it's a sensitive subject, and it's probably difficult to make a set decision, and it'll have to be every race and every conditions kind of will be determined individually. I think that in that situation, it would probably, the race director would have some responsibility to make sure there was enough water if hydration was going to be a concern, either by pointing out the places for water along the course that you could pick up water from. As a fell runner, you're used to picking up water from streams anywhere on the hills, but instinctively before a hot race, you would tend to look at where you can get water on the course, and then plan to take more water before, if you're going a long section where there wasn't likely to be water. So I think that if you were running a race and you knew that there was a long section without water, and then you would need to, warn people. I would think it would probably be responsible to warn people that there was going to be a longer section without water, to be aware of that when it was hot. But ultimately, we choose to run in the mountains because it's our responsibility. We choose to run in the mountains, we take on a certain level of risk, and that comes down to being able to navigate as well, kind of knowing the way to look after yourself in the mountains, and you can't just heap all that kind of responsibility on the race organizer. To some extent, we're the one, we choose to do the sport, and that comes with a certain responsibility to do that yourself. So I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. A bit of both.
So so obviously in the household, you've got the kind of you steal the main kind of headlines, but Conrad's a fairly nifty runner too, isn't he? So he was third to your second on the DB. He's raced DB again and finished fourth, did you say? The Dragon's Back race. So is there an element of competitiveness, not necessarily for the media spotlight, but when you're out and about on the hills, do you kind of push each other quite hard?
I think it's interesting because when we're actually doing events together, we get on really well. You hear of couples that kind of argue if they were to do a mountain marathon or something, but we get on really well. In fact, my Christmas present was that we were going to run the On together this year. So so I'm really lucky in that sense. And actually, now that we've got kids, those kind of moments when we can run together are really precious. So if grandparents can look after the kids for a few hours, like they did last week when we ran Sierres and Al as a recovery run after the UTMR, then those are kind of really special moments. So really lucky. There is an element of competitiveness that's in terms of kind of if we were running a short race, then Conrad would be faster than me, but the longer it gets, the more equal it is, and then there'll be days when I'm better, and there'll be days when he's better. So there is definitely an element of competitiveness as well. Yeah.
Great stuff. Okay, would you like to play a game with me, Jasmin? Would you like to play a kind of a preference game? So if I give you two options and you tell me which one you prefer.
Ahead.
Right. Okay. So I've written a few down here in typical Blue Peter style. All right.
Yeah.
So I'll read them out and you tell me what you think. Okay. So UTMB or UTMR?
UTMR.
Ramsey round or Bob Graham round?
Ramsey round.
Sky running or fell running?
Fell running. Oh, that's a difficult one, but fell running. It's my first love.
Gels or bars?
Bars.
Flat Coke or electrolytes?
Flat Coke.
Courtney or Beth?
Beth.
Brilliant. Jasmin, thank you ever so much. I know you've got another appointment to go to, so I don't want to keep you any longer, but thank you ever so much for agreeing to have a chat to ULTRA TV today. If you've liked the interview with Jasmin and me, please click on the like button below. Don't forget to subscribe to our ULTRA TV channel. And if you want to subscribe to ULTRA Magazine, you can find us at www.ultra-magazine.com. You might want to click on notifications so you get updates every time we post a new video. Thank you ever so much. Jasmin, thank you again.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.